us. Canada is an Arctic nation, yet only a small percentage of Canadians actually live there. How do people living in southern parts of Canada, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, learn about unique and fascinating marine animals that inhabit this environment? Let me present to you the online Arctic Marine Life course. The course is supported by Science in Canada's North Café Scientifique series. We would like to acknowledge the support of the W. Garfield Weston Foundation and the Canadian Association of Science Centres for their support. Our partners include the Alliance of Natural History Museums of Canada, Canada's Accredited Zoos and Aquariums, TELUS Spark in Calgary, Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, and the Discovery Centre in Halifax. If you'd like to keep track of the dates and location of presentations on our website, you can check the website at vanaqua.org/Arctic Marine Life Course. If you miss a presentation, you can always watch it online after it has been recorded. If you have any questions about the course or would like to register for the course, you can contact Jonathan Hillquist at vanaqua.org. Our speaker is Tessa Danelesko from the BC Cetacean Sightings Network at the Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Centre. Tessa studied at the University of Victoria and focused on biology and psychology. Her expertise is with whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and will be giving us an introduction to cetaceans of the Arctic. Tessa, over to you.
Do a quick check to see that the mic's working. Everyone can hear me? Perfect, thanks. Great, thank you so much, Nino. Good evening, everyone. Like Nino shared, my name is Tessa Danelesko, and I'm the coordinator of the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, which is a collaboration between the Vancouver Aquarium and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And we're a citizen science project that collects sightings of cetaceans and sea turtles from the BC coast. Today, though, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about cetaceans of the Arctic. So I'll get right into it. The Arctic is actually home to 16 species of cetaceans, 11 species of pinnipeds, and polar bears. All of these animals spend time in Arctic waters, but what's important to note is that 11 of these species are actually listed as at risk under the Species at Risk Act. So there are some conservation concerns for these species, and we'll address a few of those this evening. I'm going to start by giving a really brief overview on some cetacean key features. So these don't just apply to Arctic cetaceans. We're going to be thinking about them applying to all species. So cetaceans, they're either going to be odontocetes or mysticetes. And basically what that means is they're going to be toothed whales or they're going to possess baleen. The species can also be differentiated by having one blowhole or two, and examples of species that have two blowholes are humpbacks, blue whales, minkies, or fin whales, and those that have one blowhole are going to be narwhals, belugas, and killer whales. We can also look at those accordion-like ventral pleats that you're seeing on the underside of these animals. Some species have many ventral pleats, like humpback, minkies, or fins, while others might have few, like gray whales. They'll just have 2 or 3. And toothed whales or odontocetes will be smooth, like we can see on this killer whale here. Dorsal fins are also really important to pay attention to when we're thinking of cetaceans. Up in the Arctic, certainly there are those species that don't have any dorsal fin, and those are the belugas, the narwhals, and the bowhead whales. Everything else does have a dorsal fin, and these are really, really important to pay attention to, not only when we're thinking about distinguishing different species, but also individuals as well, as there can be many unique markings, nicks, or notches on them that can be identifying features. These dorsal fins will vary in size and shape. So you can see humpbacks in the upper left there. They'll have that characteristic low and lumpy dorsal fin. Blue whales on the upper right are going to have a very stout dorsal fin. That falcate kind of half crescent moon shape is characteristic of a lot of species, from dolphins up to fin whales. And killer whales, at least male killer whales, are going to have that very, very tall dorsal fin like we're seeing there. We can also look at the shape of the pectoral fin. This is part of the body is not always going to be visible above the surface of the water, but if we do get a glimpse, it can help us distinguish who we're checking out. Humpbacks are going to have the really unique kind of scalloped edge to their dorsal fin, but you also can check out different shapes such as the paddle-like shape of the killer whale or that unique white stripe we can see in that middle photo, and that belongs to minke whale. Fluke shapes are certainly fall into that category as well. We can think of them in terms of being very different in shape, size, and color, but also behaviorally. It's sometimes possible if you think about humpbacks, they're going to be fluking quite a bit, bringing their tail out of the water, whereas that behavior is much more rare for other species like fin whales. Skin, can be very, very variable, I should say, between many species. Narwhals are going to have the really unique mottled skin pattern. We'll see that on gray whales as well. Belugas have that striking white color. And you'll also see color variations in different body parts like fin whales, which I'll get into in a little bit. So that's just a really quick overview about what we really should be paying attention to when we're thinking about cetaceans. We're going out on the water. We want to know what part of the body to look at that can help us figure out what we're catching a glimpse of. But I'll jump right into talking a little bit more about specific species we can find in Arctic waters. So starting with the beluga whale, a very iconic species that we can find in the Arctic. We're very lucky that we can experience or see beluga whales up close in zoos and aquariums because living so high up north, right in the Arctic, is inaccessible for many people. So we get to know a lot about the species by studying them in a zoo or aquarium context. We know that belugas are incredibly social, so we'll often see them in groups. And physically, when we're looking at them, they have that bulbous head, very prominent melon. They're going to be often covered in a lot of scratches and scars. And this is from getting very close to sea pack or sea ice pack, but also from predators such as polar bears. You'll see scars on these animals. They have no dorsal fin, which is pretty important if you think of them living very close to sea ice. A dorsal fin could be something that could get in the way. And again, that very, very striking white color, which they don't always have. Young belugas are born kind of a dark gray, and as they age, will lose that color. In terms of their distribution, you can see their year-round distribution on this map here, but that will shift in the autumn where certain individuals will gather in kind of shallow areas, warmer areas to calf. Belugas, like we heard our speaker earlier mention as well, rely very heavily on the sea ice. We know that the Arctic is very much interconnected in terms of the food web. And small invertebrates will live on the bottom surface of the sea ice, and they're going to be consumed by Arctic cod, which belugas eat a lot of. So when we're thinking about the disappearing, about the sea ice in the Arctic disappearing, certainly that effect we can see travel all the way up the food web, and there is some concern in terms of making sure that belugas have enough food when we're thinking about the ice disappearing. Narwhals are another very unique, very iconic species that we can think of in terms of cetaceans living up in the Arctic. Their body plan and size are actually pretty comparable to belugas, except for that very large tusk that you can see. Physically, you can see that very unique mottled skin pattern age, whereas younger individuals tend to be a little bit darker. That tusk can grow up to about 3 meters long, and often you'll see narwhals traveling in groups. They are social, just like belugas. And in terms of their distribution, you can see it here detailed on this map. They will tend to spend a lot of time in deeper water, but that will shift seasonally as they calf as well. For the tusks, they can grow up to 3 meters, like I said. It's actually a modified tooth in the upper jaw on the left-hand side. We're not exactly sure what it's for, but we think it might play a role in male dominance hierarchy. But interestingly, up to about 2% of females will also have tusks, and some individuals have also been recorded to have 2 tusks as well. We do know that there are many, many nerve endings in these tusks as well, so does that perhaps mean that these tusks have an important role in terms of sensing the environment around the narwhal? Historically, these tusks have played some interesting roles. In the medieval times, they were many times their weight in gold in terms of trading them. And in the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth purchased one for 10,000 pounds, which at that time she could have actually purchased a castle. So they've always been incredibly valuable, obviously exceptionally beautiful as well. So moving on to killer whales, certainly an iconic species when we think of British Columbian cetaceans, but we can also find them in the Arctic. We know that there's not too many of them up there. It's likely that the population is actually less than 1,000 in the eastern Canadian Arctic. When we think of individuals spending time in the Western Arctic, those are more incidental sightings. So there are some efforts to photo-identify these animals, and what we're going to be paying attention to when we do that is two parts of the body of the killer whale, the saddle patch, which is this gray area just behind the dorsal fin here, and the dorsal fin itself. And you can see those kind of interesting nicks and notches there. Those are going to be really important to look at, to pick up on unique markings to help us track individual killer whales. Killer whales have dimorphism, and we can look at these different markings to help us understand if individuals are males or females. Females are going to have a shallower U-shaped genital area, kind of that white patch that you can see, whereas males have a much longer V shape. In terms of dorsal fins too, we can notice a marked difference. Females are going to have a much more curved dorsal fin. They'll maintain this shape of their dorsal fin throughout their entire lives. Whereas males, when they reach sexual maturity, will actually sprout, is what the term is. That dorsal fin will grow from a shape that's similar to a female to have that very straight trailing edge. Juveniles, however, can be really tough to distinguish what sex they are until the males sprout. So oftentimes for killer whales, it takes many, many years, sometimes decades, to understand if an individual is a male or a female. So here's a distribution map for killer whales in the Arctic and through eastern Canada as well. And like I said, you will see these animals traveling throughout through the eastern Canadian Arctic, but sightings in the western are considered incidental. Like killer whales here in BC, when we're thinking about the bigs or transient marine mammal eating killer whales, Arctic killer whales also eat a variety of prey, and they'll focus on anything from belugas to seals to humpback whales to minke whales to fin whales. So very, very impressive predators. There are a number of threats that killer whales in the Arctic face, anything from hunting to acoustic and vessel disturbance. So when we're thinking again about sea ice in the Arctic melting, this means that there's increased accessibility for vessels to travel to that area. Killer whales being generally a very vocal species, they rely very heavily on sound to communicate, but also to echolocate. Any type of noise disturbance in that environment can disrupt those natural processes, and that's certainly something that we need to be paying attention to and trying to minimize when possible. Contaminants as well, even though most humans live far below the Arctic. We learned all about ocean currents earlier, and contaminants can certainly be carried in those currents and end up in very, very remote places like the Arctic, travel up the food web through processes like bioaccumulation, biomagnification, and they end up concentrating in the upper levels of the food web. In animals like killer whales. So certainly when we're thinking about contaminants, the use of those products even by us down here can affect these northern species. Moving on to those mysticetes or baleen whales that can be found up in the Arctic. Minke whales are up there. They're about 10 meters long. They tend to be very shy, very inconspicuous, and also be solitary, which means they can be hard to spot, but also hard to study for that exact same reason. What they look like physically, they're going to have kind of that falcate shape to their dorsal fin located far back on their body. And they're going to have many of those ventral pleats that you can see in this image here, and kind of a pointy head. Now they have that unique band that you can see that I mentioned earlier around that pectoral flipper. Although you're seeing in this image a minke whale breaching, that's not typical behavior for this species, but I like to show this image because it shows that white band quite well. Humpback whales, we can also find them in northern waters. A little bit bigger, they're around 15 meters. We'll see them solitary, maybe in pairs, but we will see them in larger aggregations while feeding. They have really kind of unique knobs on the front of their face. Those are called tubercles, and they're actually fat-filled. So as humpback whales gain or lose blubber, these tubercles will grow accordingly. And interestingly, each one of those tubercles is actually there's one hair poking out of them, and we think those hairs provide help in kind of sensing the humpback's environment around it. I mentioned earlier that humpback whales also fluke often. That's an interesting behavior we also note for this species, and they have that low, lumpy dorsal fin. Humpbacks have many, many interesting feeding techniques, some of which are still being discovered as we learn more about this species. But certainly in the Arctic, they'll be feeding on small krill or invertebrates and also forage fish. So if you see if you're in an area and there's large aggregations of these species, there is a chance you're also going to see a larger aggregation of humpback whales. And certainly as a social, or they've formed some interesting kind of social cooperative behaviors in terms of feeding on these species that can be very impressive. Humpback whales, their Latin name is Megaptera novengliae, which actually means big wings of New England, and that's really referring to really large pectoral flippers that you can see in this image here. Sometimes you'll see them waving them around or slapping them on the surface of the water, but it is a very important trait to point out about the species. They're also very well known for displaying some spectacular behavior. Like we can see in this video here, they can be incredibly active, often breaching with their whole bodies launching out of the water. In terms of identifying specific individuals, it's actually the bottom or the underside of their tail flukes that are essentially like our fingerprints. Each marking on the underside there is unique to that individual, and that can be extremely helpful for us when we're thinking about tracking humpbacks on kind of an individual basis. Getting a little larger here again, bowhead whales, also kind of a solitary species, but like humpbacks will form larger groups when feeding. Physically, they're really interesting animals. They have really broad flukes that you'll sometimes see come out of the water, distinct white markings that you can see on their lower jaw, and that jaw curves sharply downwards. Their range, you can see in this image here, they do tend to form summer aggregations that will form, kind of concentrate all the way from the northern aspect of Hudson Bay up into the high Arctic, and that, again, will change seasonally. They are known for having absolutely massive baleen, which you can see in this image here. They'll have about 330 plates of this baleen, and each one can grow over 4 meters long, so really impressive. And what they're going to be using this baleen for is actually to strain their prey, so those invertebrates or krill that we were talking about, these baleen whales eating, and they'll skim feed right at the surface. Fin whales, we can find them up in the Arctic, and they're the second largest species of cetacean in the world. Generally tend to be solitary, but you will find them sometimes in pairs or slightly larger groups. Extremely streamlined body. They're going to have a huge column-like blow, and oftentimes the blowhole is visible, the blowhole, when they do surface, is below the surface of the water before that dorsal fin even pops up. So that gives you a scale for really how large these animals are. They also have really interesting coloration when we're thinking of their lower jaws. The right side is actually white, and the left side is dark. So this is a really important physical characteristic that we can look at to actually fully confirm that we are looking at a fin whale if we are around one. So just to show you a quick video of what a surfacing fin whale looks like, you can see the blowhole went down, you saw the back, and then there's that fin on the back there, and you might have noticed the absence of a tail coming out of the water. Unlike humpbacks, fluking is actually quite a rare behavior for fin whales. Now on to the blue whale, of course, as all of you know, the largest species of whale, or the largest animal, I should say, that's ever existed on Earth. It's about 30 meters long, the size of 3 full-size yellow school buses end to end, and we can find them up north. As big as they are, they actually have quite a small, stout dorsal fin. I do notice it says dorsal fun there, so that's cool. Dorsal fins, they're going to be seen way, way after the blowhole or head have submerged back in the water. They really do have a bluish tint to them, and they have a unique modeling pattern on their skin. And we can actually look at that pattern closely and identify specific individuals. To give you a size scale for how big these animals are, here's some aerial footage that was captured of a blue whale. And it builds up a little bit here, keeps you in suspense, but as you get closer, you'll really see how big they can be. You saw a huge blow there, and as you get closer, you can really just see how massive that blue whale is. So that's just a quick overview of cetaceans that we can find in the Arctic. There are more species out there, and my suggestion, if you are looking for more resources, you'd like to learn more, please connect with Jonathan, and I'll be able to provide him resources for you to get deeper into the world of Arctic cetaceans. So with that, I will say thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, and I'd like to invite any questions at this time. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Tessa. So thank you for joining us today. The Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Centre is a not-for-profit organization committed to conserving aquatic life. If you'd like to support the aquarium and its programs, you can visit our website at www.vanaquat.org. Thank you.